I'm going to record this presentation on video and the slide presentation. It'll be made available. I'll send it to Nadine to get it out to you guys afterwards. And also this presentation will be available in PowerPoint with all the links so you can follow up and check all this stuff yourself. So as Nadine so graciously said, my name is Geoff Snicer. I'm a father of two. I'm a very proud Canadian. You might have seen the Save Canada truck out in the parking lot. That's mine. And I did a little trip across the United States, tried to meet with their freedom fighters down there, and that's not even a word that they know in the States. They just call them patriots. Freedom fighter is something very specific to Canada, but I do consider myself a freedom fighter, and I'm a very proud Canadian. So I love this country. I was born here, but I've also had the benefit of living overseas and seeing other countries for just over a decade of my life. When I worked in oil and gas. And I just want to correct Nadine on one thing, I'm not an engineer. I can't say that in Canada, I'd get in trouble, so I'm a technologist. So I'm not claiming to be an engineer, Pega, don't sue me. So tonight we're going to talk about sustainable development. We're going to go through some of the legislation. We're going to talk about land use and water use. We'll talk about housing, transportation. If we have time, we'll get into the smart city aspect of it, and then we'll get into some solutions. It should take about an hour and 10 minutes. I promise it won't take much longer than that, but there's about 100 and something slides in here, so I'm going to load you guys up. I will talk fast. If you can't hear me, just let me know. And if you have questions, please save them for the end. Also, disclaimer, this presentation, I've included stuff from the RDCK. There's information from Nelson, from Creston. I don't think I got anything from Castlegar. But this also has information from Kamloops, Kelowna, Vancouver, Victoria, Saanich. I've traveled all over. So it's kind of a conglomeration of info, but wherever possible, I'll try to tell you that this is specific to the RDCK. And before I start, just by show of hands, how many of you consider yourselves to be freedom fighters here today? Quite a few? All right, how many farmers do we have here?
Partial.
Couple hobby farmers? Okay. Right on. How many people here have heard of sustainable development? Okay, so preaching to the choir, so to speak. How many people have not heard of it? All right. How many people here are hippies? Gotta love the hippies. Okay. How many people don't know why they're here? Right? Okay, so we broke the ice. So we're going to talk about some really complicated stuff, and I just want to tell you up front, some of these ideas are nuanced. They're broken up and they're segmented, so I'm going to try and distill it down to what we need to pay attention to. Always with sustainable development, there's always a reason given to you for everything. We're doing this because of this, and those are always true statements, but lacking in almost all cases is the context. And what I'm going to do today is give you guys the context you need to look at things and make sense of them. As an example, here we have a trainee doctor, never treated a patient before in his life, and somehow he's been put in the position of doctor, and I cut my finger, it's bleeding, and I go in and I say, hey doc, my finger's bleeding. I'm thinking he's going to give me a Band-Aid, and he says, no problem, I got the solution for you. He cuts my arm off, sews it up, and there's no more blood. So he solved the problem, but that was not the solution that I was looking for. It was out of context. Okay? So that's what I'm talking about with these climate sustainability plans. The other idea that we want to think about, keep in our mind, is that not everything in these plans is bad. There's a lot of really helpful ideas in these plans, but like a teaspoon of sugar with a drop of cyanide, yes, the sugar is sweet, it's good for you, but that drop of cyanide is still going to kill you. So we're going to try and focus on the drop of cyanide. That's what I'm here to do today. So sustainable development, I used to think about it very simply. It just means doing business, developing in a way that's not bad for the environment, and that's the way most people would typically describe it. But I think what we need to do is look at the history. So if we go back to 1991, this is an excerpt from Kamloops this week. At that time, under the Socret government, they sent some experts around BC, and they had a round table, and they asked local people, what do you think sustainable development is? And they came up with this definition that ensuring our use of resources and the environment today does not damage the prospect of their being used by future generations, which sounds very reasonable. However, even in 1991, we had people in Kamloops pointing out that sustainable development is actually an Moron. You cannot sustain the forest while you're cutting it down and building on top of it. You're either sustaining or you are developing. You're not doing both at the same time. So I think it's useful too to understand the history. Can you guys see this in the back?
Yeah.
Yeah. This handsome guy here, his name is Maurice Strong. And he's an oil man from Alberta. And he was tapped in 1972 to head the United Nations Conference on Humanity and Environment. He later went on to become the Under Secretary General of the United Nations. He was best friends with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And he was the first head of the United Nations Environmental Program. There's 1976 in Vancouver. We'll see that British Columbia and Canada have played actually a big role in the development of these policies. There was a report that came out in 1987 called Our Common Future. It's also referred to as the Brundtland Report after the Prime Minister of Norway who headed that report. And this is where they came up with the definition of sustainable development. In 1990, at the World Conference of Local Governments at the United Nations in New York, a new organization was formed known as ICLEI. It's the International Council on Environmental Local Initiatives. Now they're just local governments for sustainability. They were created because they knew that in 2 years there was going to be a worldwide summit in 1992 called the Earth Summit that everybody would attend, and they were going to deal with the problems facing the environment. And that's where we hear for the first time about Agenda 21. So there's Maurice Strong. He told us back then that in 1992, and he headed up the United Nations at the 1992 conference. He told us that current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, high intake of meat, use of fossil fuels, electrical appliances, is not sustainable. So this is what he was saying back in 1992. So what is Agenda 21? We'll go back to Kamloops this week. This is from 1992. They tell us here Agenda 21 will be a blueprint for global sustainable development. Agenda for the 21st century, Agenda 21. If anybody tells you this isn't real, it was widely reported, it's not a conspiracy, it's an actual thing that we signed up to as a country. So much so that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities commissioned a report in partnership with the Canadian Council of Ministers of Environment. You may have seen this in other videos, and here they're telling us the same thing that Maurice Strong told us, that our modern life is unsustainable. Single houses, automobiles, consumption is unsustainable. In that same report that was commissioned for the FCM, they gave us an overview of new doctrines that we adopted. It's called the Rio Declaration. So this happened in Rio. And they said that going forward, to achieve sustainable development, environmental protection shall constitute an integral part of the development process and cannot be considered in isolation. So everything we do going forward as a society, we must do it through the lens of the environment. We also came up with a new doctrine that we have to eliminate unsustainable patterns of living. So anything that's considered unsustainable, we must get rid of. And then we also said, and this is a big one, that we will use the precautionary principle. Does anybody know what that is? In medicine, you test a medicine or a vaccine extensively before you give it to everyone. That's the precautionary principle. You assume it's going to do harm until it's proven safe. Okay? This is like the opposite. We're unleashing unproven sustainable development and technologies on the world because no matter what, we have to save the environment. Okay? It's kind of backwards. And they came up with this other idea that we're going to think globally and act locally. So now global problems must be solved at the local level. It was recognized that our actions locally at the municipal level are important. Another word for that is global. And here in green there it says local action, global contribution. That's from the Nelson Next environmental plan. This is another document that came out in 1996. This one was actually commissioned by the IDRC, which is a federal government corporation. It's funded by the taxpayers. It's the International Development Research Center. So again, Canada played a big role in this, and they, in partnership with ICLEI, that group that was founded in 1990, came out with the Local Agenda 21 Planning Guide. So this is a guide for local municipalities to roll out Agenda 21. And the local contact for Canada, this is a worldwide document, was listed as the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And here they tell us that sustainable development is a program of action for local and global economic reform. It's not just about the environment. And they say that the program has yet to be fully defined. So they're not really sure what it is at this point, but they know that it's economic and social reform. If we go back and look at ICLEI, this is their founding paper from 1990. This is before Agenda 21 came out. They told us that local governments must begin to restructure social and economic life at the local level. That's why ICLEI was formed. They go on to say that global problems can only be solved through a restructuring of human society at the local level. So again, we see this focus now, it's not just about the environment, it's about restructuring our society and economy. It's a lot more than the environment. So we do have a modern definition here in Canada. This is the Sustainable Development Act. This is a federal act across Canada. And here they give us the legal definition. And they say that the principle of sustainable development is based on an efficient use of social, economic, and natural resources. So it's not just the environment. They go on to say that we must integrate environmental, economic, and social factors in every decision the government makes. So we have to look through that lens. We can't just make decisions in isolation. And then the very next point, they say what they told us in 1996. Keep in mind, this is a modern bill from this century. It says, the principle of sustainable development is a continually evolving concept. So it's the economy, nature, and social, so it's everything, but it's not defined. It's continuously evolving. Everything and nothing all at the same time. This is the legal definition. We don't know what's sustainable, but we do know what's unsustainable. And because there's no proof necessary, because of the precautionary principle, nobody has to prove this. Automobiles, air conditioning, appliances, eating meat, suburban homes, fossil fuels, rural living, farming, fertilizer, flying, all of these things have been shown to be unsustainable at one time or another. And then, Agenda 21 is no longer Agenda 21. In 2015, we signed up for Agenda 2030, the Agenda for Sustainable Development, and something that came along with that called the Sustainable Development Goals. So it was Mulroney in 1992, Conservative Prime Minister, and then Harper in 2015, just before the Liberals got in, signed us up for Agenda 2030. And what Agenda 2030 is based around is the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I would describe that to you guys is an integrated project management system. It comes along with 17 different policies. Each policy has metrics you must track and your key performance indicators, and you have to continuously report on your progress. And all the countries in the world are voluntarily doing this, and they're sending reports to the United Nations. And it covers everything from poverty, hunger, health, resources, energy, water, equity, gender, education, economy. It's basically everything. This is from their own website. You see they've got that nice little colorful wheel there. And you see there's our environmental minister, Stephen Guilbeault. He's got the same pin on his shirt. You'll notice this on our federal politicians quite a lot. And it's really hard for you guys to see, so I'll just point this out to you. There's a nice Venn diagram here. And this top circle says environment, the bottom one says social, and this one says economic. And where all these overlap in the middle, this is what is sustainable development. So it's not just about the environment. But I'd like you to think for a minute, if the government is trying to control those things to achieve sustainable development, what is the abstract concept here? What does that really entail? And what that really means is a government-managed environment, a government-managed economy, and government-managed social values. Okay? That's the only way to achieve the goals, unless we all voluntarily do it through laissez-faire capitalism in the free market. But that's not going to happen because that doesn't make any sense. It's against all economic incentives to do this. So it's government-managed everything. That's what sustainable development is.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, when do we get to say no?
So,
We are.
The next question, guys, is it going to solve anything? So I'll just read this out to you. I know it's really small. This is a news clipping from 1994. I think I pulled this out of the LA Times. And it says that in Beijing, China on Friday unveiled an ambitious plan to promote sustainable development. Wow. Agenda 21 addresses how China, with the world's largest population of 1.2 billion and rising levels of both consumption and pollution, can realize its economic hopes without destroying the environment. See this little line here? That was right there, 1994. That red line is their output of CO2, greenhouse gas. Okay? And then the top little map there, that's showing all the emissions coming out of Asia. So we need context. This is the world's emissions of CO2. China is the big pink one here at 30%. They're going like this. They're continuing to rise because they got 1.4 billion people that are coming out of poverty and consuming more. They're building 2 coal-fired power plants per week. Okay? And then we have Canada. We're this little sliver here. We're actually less than this now because that one's bigger and ours is smaller. We're 1.6% of global anthropogenic emissions for CO2. So the question is, in this context of a rising China and India, India's the gray one there, a rising China and India, if we go to zero right now, will that stop climate change? It's in context, no. Okay? Definitely not. And what about methane? So this is from a recent report, did a study using satellites to see where methane comes from. And on the left it says energy and agriculture, waste, those are the anthropogenic sources on the left. And that big one, that's wetlands. So all of our activity for methane combined produces less than 1/3 of the methane that comes out of the wetlands, which is the most potent greenhouse gas, so they say. So again, context. And then we need to talk about something called collective rights. So here in Canada, you have individual rights that are supposedly guaranteed. You have the Bill of Rights and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's well defined. You have the freedom of expression, among other things. And everybody knows what the limit is. Okay? You can take that up to a point when you start harming other people. But now we're looking at everything through collective rights. Collective rights are not defined. So when you say, well, I'm not going to go along with the climate agenda because I have a farm and this is going to affect me financially. And we'll say, well, what about the rest of the people? We all have a right to the air. We all have a right to the water. We all have a right to the earth. So you're fighting now against collective rights. And we don't know where those begin, and we don't know where they end. And the trouble is, if we're worried about collective rights, then you have no individual rights. Okay? So this is the UN. It says that rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purpose of the United Nations. That's in the United Nations Charter of Freedom. So just to recap, sustainable development. It's Agenda 21, which is Agenda 2030, which is sustainable development. Everything we do has to be through the lens of climate because of the climate. Comes with its own new philosophy that collective rights are greater than your individual rights, and we must think globally and act locally. Sustainable development cannot be defined. It's always changing. It's in the ether somewhere. Nobody knows what it is. New legal and legislative doctrines have been adopted by other countries in the world, and there's no proof necessary. The plans were not conceived or written in Canada. They don't have Canada's interests first. Much of our modern life is considered unsustainable. It requires undefined economic and social transformation. That's what they told us from the very beginning, and now we're starting to really see it in 2020. Okay, 2025, you'll see a lot more. It's going to result necessarily in government control of pretty much everything. There's no other way to do it because it's not compatible with capitalism and a free market society. And it will not stop climate change. It will not prevent the next atmospheric river. So that's sustainable development. So what does this look like in the Kootenays? So depending on where you guys are from, I understand there's a lot of different municipalities and areas in the districts here. Each town has its own thing called an OCP, which is an official community plan. This is the one from Creston. They call it their freshly picked future. And then each district should have its own OCP as well. And underneath that OCP, you can think of the OCP as like an overarching constitutional bylaw. It sets out the general direction. And then you have specific plans, like there's Creston's Climate Action Plan, that's a draft. They have their multimodal transportation plan, disaster response plan, integrated community sustainability plan. And as long as these plans are in line with that OCP, they're okay. But if they want to do something that's not in line with OCP, they'll have to amend the OCP. Does that sound great? No. If we zoom out a little bit more, so I put the RDCK in line with Creston there, and then you zoom out, now we can see British Columbia. So we've got the Clean BC policy from the NDP government. They've got their Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, which holds people to account. The Zero EV Act, which is banning the internal combustion engine. The Carbon Tax Act, which is again holding companies and government agencies to account. The Water Sustainability Act. These are all parts of sustainable development. If we zoom out even further, at the federal level, we have something called the Pan-Canadian Framework, which was put in place for the federal government to enact their requirements under the Paris Accord. And there's the Sustainable Development Act. And then if you zoom out even further, you've got 192 other countries which are all voluntarily reporting this information to the United Nations. That's why we're doing this. Another thing to look out for is something called social procurement. So there I showed a little picture that's propaganda from World War II. It shows a Russian commissar shooting a soldier in the back. Okay, in World War II there was a political commissar with every leader of every group of soldiers, and they had to make sure that whatever they were doing was in line with the party. So what social procurement is basically what ESG is, environment, social, and governance. It's applying an ideological lens to the purse strings. So now when you make purchasing decisions, they must not only meet the needs of whatever you're trying to do, is it budgetarily efficient, can they deliver it in time? Those are normal things you consider when you purchase assets, but now you have to consider diversity, equity, inclusion, the environment, and all these other ideological things. Okay, so now we have a commissar, in a way, that's at the purse strings. And here's it's called the Climate Workbook from the RDCK, and the same thing, they're looking at doing asset management through the lens of the environment. And the FCM talks a lot about this, actually. So here, I'm going to say that, remember I told you at the start, not everything in these plans is bad, but if you're making a plan for something, but your only focus is to get to the objective of that plan and you don't consider anyone or anything else, you're inevitably going to step on people's toes and harm other systems. So here in Nelson, they're going to redo their OCP, and they're telling us what considerations will we take into account when we redo the OCP. It'll be next year they put it out. And they say context and trends, participant input, professional expertise, existing plans and strategies, and then of course the lens of equity and climate framework. That's the ideological lens. Nowhere in there does it say anything about your property rights, your individual rights, your right to travel, your right to freedom, your right to privacy. So this plan inevitably will take the shortest way to accomplish those objectives because it's not considering you as individuals, it's only considering collective rights. So it's the wrong objectives. They're not asking us about the objectives. They're just asking us how to accomplish the objectives. And that OCP will reference something called climate action. And climate action is goal number 13 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And you see there's a big creepy eyeball there, which the UN likes to use a lot. And I think the reason why they did that is because the number one thing you do in a climate action plan is start recording data. So you start doing inventories, you start coming up with metrics, you start recording data because they want to show where you are and where you're getting to. So climate action necessarily includes a whole lot of data taking, okay? And it's often ideologically driven, as we see, and according to the United Nations, that climate action is intrinsically linked to all other of the 16 Sustainable Development Goals. So they're all basically the same. And there's the Paris Agreement at the bottom right-hand corner. It's got the Sustainable Development wheel on it. It's also related. So how does the Paris Agreement work? Well, the Paris Agreement tells us that it requires, again, economic and social transformation. It doesn't actually have the word environment anywhere on there. Amazingly, I don't even think it has the word climate on there. No, it just says economic and social transformation. And it's going to work on a 5-year cycle. So the first cycle was 2015 when we signed on to it, then it was 2020. So you notice there was a lot of changes that happened during COVID, and a lot of the talk in the media was like, we're going to remake things and build back better, and COVID was kind of like this convenience excuse. Right? It's even in the climate plan here, they're talking about how they'll use COVID as a springboard to push these changes through. But they're going to say that every 5 years there will be a continuous ratcheting up of climate action into 2030. So if you think it's bad now, it's going to get that much worse in 2025. And you can already start to see the headlines talking about this urgent need for more climate action. So one of the things that local councils do in BC is declare an emergency. The RDCK apparently declared a climate emergency or a crisis. I couldn't find the reference for it, but it's listed on this website. And there's quite a few other cities in BC that have declared it as well. And there's a website here called Climate Emergency Declaration. They urge people to declare emergencies around the world. So I think they have 4,000 cities worldwide who have declared a crisis. And here you can see, I was just down in Maple Ridge doing the same presentation, and there was a group down there called Climate Hub that was urging the local council to roll out a climate plan and declare an emergency. So I looked into those guys for the Kootenays. You have them here. It's a Canada-wide thing. They're just one of many, many, many groups that are pushing local councils and government. They're influencing them to push through the environmental agenda. So you have the West Kootenay and the East Kootenay Climate Hub. And just ironically, last night while I did this presentation in Creston, they had an online meeting. And I suggest if you guys are interested to see what's coming for your future, you should check out those meetings, because those people have the ear of your council generally. And really interestingly, this is their webinar. We've got that same Venn diagram. They're doing a thing on resilience, and it says economic resilience, social resilience, and environmental resilience. And you're going to see a shift now about resilience and disaster planning. Okay? So now it's not just about the environment. Sustainable development will also include preparing for disasters and other things. So it's kind of growing legs. As we said, it's not defined. So these climate action plans, they're all the same, and you just have to trust me. I've been across BC now. I've looked at probably 15 or 20 of them. I've looked at them across the states when I traveled there. They all basically say the same thing. We need to reduce our current emissions, and then we need to change the way that we develop to reduce future emissions. So that's changing the way we build. And that gets into things like smart growth and 15-minute cities. But they'll always show you the same pie chart, very similar. And the one on the left is from Creston, the one on the right is from Kelowna, just to give you a reference. So the little sliver on the top is emissions from waste. On the left is emissions from existing buildings, and on the right is from transportation. So transportation is the biggest one, and that's why you see it being targeted so heavily. So you've got some local, it's actually really complicated here in the RDCK because you have so many districts and plans. But you have a RDCK climate action plan, which I understood has been put on ice for now, due to people being upset about it. So congratulations. So if you go online, I might be telling you guys things you already know, but you've got the climate action workbook on the RDCK, and it gets into a lot of specifics. It talks about electrifying farm equipment, doing retrofits. It gets into all sorts of stuff. I want to tell you that that is not unique to here, but that's everywhere, and I'll show you that in some other plans. Nelson's new environment plan is called Next, and usually what happens, you guys have something else. It's your renewable energy plan, and that looks like a climate action plan to me. And that one says 5 big moves. In Kamloops, we have 8 big moves. So again, they're telling us that these are not small changes, they're not minor adjustments, they're not little course corrections, they're big changes, they're big moves that we have to make to meet these targets. And that's also there at the bottom, you know that trope, the socialist, communist trope about equality, where they show the short person can't see over the fence or get the apple, so they all stand on the apple carts to even it out. but in reality, the tall guy actually gets his knees broken and his money taken. Like that's how communism really works, right? But that's in your document, so it is an ideological document. And then this is your West Kootenays renewable energy plan. So I consider this to be a climate action plan. That's what it looks like to me. It's got all the same stuff as all the other climate action plans. And they've got this really cool chart here. And they say if you do everything in the climate action or the renewable energy plan, if you start in 2020, here we are 2023, you go all the way to 2050, we could save potentially 1.8 million tons of CO2. Isn't that amazing?
Sure.
Isn't that amazing? Okay, well, I want to give you guys the context. Okay, the context. This is the Domtar pulp mill in Kamloops. That puts out 1.6 million tons of CO2 per year in 1 year. Okay? So they're asking everyone here to make these sacrifices, potentially invest $30,000 to retrofit your house, buy a $60,000 EV, forego having your own transportation. That's going to cost you a lot. Now times that by what, 80,000 people? Is that worth a Domtar pulp mill? I don't know, like who's making the decisions here? If they really thought it was that big of a deal, they'd probably go and shut down Domtar. But there's no context provided.
It's all about humans changing their practices.
Exactly. So now we get into this concept of smart growth. So this is reducing our emissions in the future. Okay, that's what smart growth is. It's saying instead of building out in this urban sprawl where everybody gets a single family house and uses all this water to water their lawn, we're going to keep the city boundaries where they are, use the existing sewer and water infrastructure and start to build up. That's what smart growth is. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but it's a picture of a beautiful, vibrant city, resilient, beautiful, smart city. There's bicycles, there's public transit, but there's no cars. That's the urban planner's vision of the future. Okay, is that there's no cars. That's what smart growth is. Other words to describe this would be the 15-minute city concept, compact neighborhoods, complete streets, thin streets. There's a million different euphemisms for this. But I want to say it's not necessarily a bad idea. Okay? But it's bad stuff, and I'm going to show you in a minute which is a bad idea. But I don't have an issue with this. I have an issue if this is forced on me. Okay?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's right.
And then if you read CBC, when they go through and they debunk these 15-minute conspiracies, they'll put some urban planner on and say, what's a 15-minute city? So it's just an urban development thing where we want people to have everything they need within a 15-minute walk or bike ride, so you don't have to drive a car. Reason being to save energy and emissions. They want a more efficient city. And that's all it is. I got no problem with that. Okay, that sounds fine. And it works for urban areas. I don't know how it would work out here in rural areas. It would be a lot more difficult. It wouldn't make much sense. So here's Creston. Creston, apparently, I read an article, is not a 15-minute city. Somebody said that. But there's an urban growth boundary there. You can only do residential growth within it. They have a greenhouse gas emission policy in their OCP, which talks about confining everything and using the same resources they already have. That's called smart growth. And they talk about complete streets, complete and compact development. That's basically a 15-minute city. Okay? But that's not all the crazy bad stuff that we think about in a 15-minute city. And I want you guys to think too, there has to be some limits on growth, right? We have to find a balance because Creston can't expand forever and take over all the farmland. You know? We have to have our farms or else we won't be able to make food. So there has to be a balance, right? We just want to make sure it makes sense. So I'm saying it's not necessarily a bad idea. But there are a lot of bad ideas that come along with this line of thinking, which I'm telling you today are basically all of the sustainable development goals. So I'm reframing this away from this 15-minute city talk to sustainable development. So because we're doing climate action, we need data. That means there will be surveillance and tracking of everything. Concentration and control of transport because it will be more efficient to save emissions. Restrictions on private property because you can't do things that are going to create emissions. That's bad. Land and water use restrictions because it belongs to everyone. It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to everyone. So it belongs to no one. And then we start to get into this idea of consumption interventions, which we'll talk about a little bit more. How many people here have heard something called 30 by 30? 30% by 2030. 30% of the land in Canada must be conserved by 2030. There's the federal government website. Same thing in the United States. Joe Biden just issued a presidential order. And this is our voluntary report that we sent to the United Nations. I don't know if you guys can see the contrast here between the dark green and the light green. Okay, so then here's the water. We've got dark blue and light blue. So all the dark stuff was added after 2017. It's substantial, and you can actually see it seems to run along provincial boundaries. BC is conserving a lot, Alberta not so much. They seem to be quite happy not conserving their land.
Could you explain that one more time?
Yeah.
And by conserving land, what do you mean, like?
Okay, so there's different ways. I usually talk more about this, but conservation happens a lot of different ways. The government can conserve it. It can go into a UNESCO Globosphere resource thing like they have out on the coast. NGOs can buy land. The name escapes me right now, but there's one that has 185 million acres, or 185,000 acres in BC. Yeah, land conservancy. Yeah, so it's happening through different means. They're, as I understand it, they're counting all of that in there. And then there's another way they do is through land covenants. And a covenant is just like it sounds, it almost sounds biblical, right? When you make a covenant, it stays with the land. So it's not a contract between he and I. When he dies, he passes it on, we write a new contract or something. It stays with the land. So if you conserve a piece of land through covenant, no one can ever use it. Okay? It stays with the land. If you die, your kids are there, they want to do it, nope. So the government, these NGOs are trying to ask farmers and people in rural areas to add areas around the riparian and things like that. So put it in a covenant, and we'll give you a little bit of money or something. Make it into a park, we'll give you some money, but that's forever. Okay, it's a one-way street. It doesn't go the other way. And the reason they're doing that, if we go back to UN Habitat in 1976, that was a picture with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. This is the preamble to their human settlements volume they released in 1976, and it says land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice. If unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. Can you guys think of a really well-known development scheme that I've been talking about for the last 20 minutes?
Yeah, no, shut up.
Agenda 2030, right? Sustainable development.
It's projection
So it's
again.
telling us that private land ownership is getting in the way of the government's development schemes, which is true. Ask any planner. They want to plan to whatever, they've got their efficiency goals or whatever it is they want to do, and all you pesky private landowners are always getting in the way. It's true, I used to work in the oil and gas industry. Landowners were always pesky to us. I just want to do my job, right? I wasn't doing my job through the lens of a private landowner. I was doing it through the lens of the oil company, right? So one of the other KPIs that we look at for sustainable development is number 6, indicator 6.5. By 2030, we have to do something called integrated water resource management at all levels of government. Okay? So we have something in BC called the Sustainable Water Act, which is integrated water resource management. And here it says it's to protect and foster economic growth. But basically what it is, it's just a push to catalog and license and then restrict and control all water use, because water is a common, right? Water is a common good. Nobody can own it because it belongs to everybody. Remember that? So the Water Sustainability Act, which was pushed through by the Liberals, which is now the BC United Party, okay? You guys remember what happened to the farmers in Westwold? You guys see that? They had their water turned off. They were taking it from the water table, and they said, yeah, but the Salmon River, 30 kilometers away, the water level's low because it hasn't rained in 4 months, right? But they're not connected. They showed them all the historical data, but they didn't care. The reason why is because that decision was made in Victoria. It has nothing to do with what's actually happening there. It's a bureaucrat making that decision based on drought levels, okay? And here it says in the act, it says that The right to use the flow of all water in any stream are for the purposes vested in the government. When voluntary conservation measures are not sufficient to meet all water rights, the Water Sustainability Act provides authority to regulate water diversion and storage by users of both stream water and groundwater. Okay? And it's if the minister considers. There's no proof necessary. There's no requirement in the act for him to have an evidence-based decision. It's if the minister considers. And just so you know, there are municipal water licenses as well. So we had a water restriction this summer in Kamloops. I couldn't wash my truck in the driveway, but all the car washes were open. Didn't make any sense, but you gotta support the businesses. And I looked into it because I was researching this, and Kamloops has a water license, and I assumed that the water restrictions were coming from the low level of the river, and there was some technical reason, like the intake of the water plant was getting too high and was sucking in mud or something like that. But there is no technical reason. The reason was someone in Victoria decided that we were on water restrictions. And I confirmed that with the city, and that's the condition of our license. So the entire city of Kamloops, 95,000 people, are at the whim of somebody in Victoria. Okay? And here you can see locally, there's that climate action workbook. They've got something there, they call it demand side management. They're talking about water, managing your demand. They want to put in water meters to measure all the water use by farmers, golf courses, everybody. And then here's from the government website right now. You may or may not know, you don't have to legally register your domestic water well. If you're using it for farming or commercial, you have to, that's the law. But any well that's drilled after 2016 has to be registered by the driller. So it's getting registered anyways if you're making new wells. But all the people with existing private use water wells, they're telling you should register it for the good of everything. Yeah. And it says right here that which helps to ensure that your use is considered in decision making during times of water scarcity. So they will put water restrictions, so they want a meter on your well, they want to see how much you use, and they're going to start to restrict you at the time of drill. It's just like with the gun registry. First you have to know where the guns are, then you track them down, and then you can take them away. It's the same thing with everything. So we also have a zero carbon future, and you guys probably know about the zero carbon step code. By 2032, we're going to be at level 4 on the step code. But according to the BC Building Code, they put out a policy paper that said after 2030 it will be zero carbon, not net zero, zero carbon. So that means zero emissions. And there's already places like Nanaimo, I think, in Vancouver Metro that have gone zero emissions for new builds. So that's no gas, no fireplaces. So I've seen here, it's kind of like a conspiracy theory, you're going to ban wood stoves. Nobody's banning wood stoves on existing houses, but they are going to ban them from a provincial level in new builds after 2030. That's according to what they say. They also have a plan to retrofit, because remember I showed you that pie chart, 30% of the emissions are from existing homes. They want to retrofit all existing buildings by 2050 at so many percentage per year. Okay, this is a pan-Canadian framework, provincial and federal plan. There's the step code. We're on level 3. Each level we go up, it's more efficient, and of course, the cost. So we're in a housing crisis in BC. Again, context. If we make our houses more efficient, will they use less electricity? Will that be better for the environment? Yes. Will people living on the street be better than people living in less efficient homes? No. So we need the context, right?
Yeah.
So in your RDCK climate workbook, it talks about something called a retrofit code that's coming. And that's different than the building code. And it absolutely is coming. There's something called the Joint Task Group on Alterations to Existing Buildings that was launched under the Pan-Canadian Framework at the federal level, because they have the same pie chart with 30% of the buildings. And they were tasked to develop a model to retrofit existing homes. And they came up with this. Okay, there's a lot of discussion about how it has to be voluntary. It has to be voluntary. They said that whatever happens, it has to be voluntary. And they came up with these lists of voluntary triggers. So doing a systems upgrade, like if your furnace dies, you got to get a new furnace. Well, you're voluntarily getting a new system, so we're going to make you get a heat pump instead of a furnace. Okay? Space reconfiguration, you're doing an addition or a renovation. If it's above a certain size, they're gonna make you re-insulate and do the windows and everything on that whole thing to bring it up to the new code. And then this is the big one, change of occupancy, not defined right now. That could be owner to renter, renter to owner, or selling the house for new owner. And what they want to do is come up with an energy guide rating on all of the houses for energy efficiency. Okay? So if your house doesn't meet the level and the government knows about it, then do you have to now upgrade your home before you can sell it? That's voluntary. It's your choice to sell your house. You see, it's voluntary. And you can see right there, they use the word, this is the word, intervention. It says existing buildings intervention. It's not a policy, it's not an incentive, it's an intervention. In the Kootenays, do we have any evidence of this? Well, yes we do. Here it says in that renewable energy plan, which I think is a climate action plan, that retrofitting these buildings via deep energy retrofits or through targeted improvements such as windows, insulation, heating, appliances will enable building owners and tenants to save energy and money. It's not saying you will, it's saying it'll enable you to, right? But there's no context, and the context is you have to spend $100,000 to upgrade the insulation, windows, doors, furnace on your house to save maybe $80 a month, maybe $200 a month if you've got a really modern, beautiful house, maybe, right? But that's a potential, and that's only while electricity prices remain low. And I will show you why they're not going to remain low. And this is, I've confirmed this with the BC Ministry of Housing. This is supposed to come in 2024, but they're now waiting for an update from a national building code. They're going to line up the building code across Canada, and this will be rolled out countrywide. So how are you going to pay for this? The government knows you don't have the money, so they came up with something called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy. And basically what this is instead of the bank having first place lien and then other loans coming out of your equity in second place, the government will change the law so they can take first place lien on your home ahead of the bank. Yes, that's what PACE is. And this is being pushed by the UBCM, the FCM, all of the groups that are supposedly representing your municipality. It's being pushed by all of them because it's the only way that people are going to be able to afford this. So it won't be based on your credit score, your credit history or anything. It'll just say, do you have equity in your house? Yes or no. If you do, then it gets first place lien and you get $100,000 free dollars to spend on retrofits. So is BC banning petroleum vehicles? Technically, if you want to get into semantics, no, they're not. So they have this plan by 2035 that 90% of all vehicles must be emissions free. But the reality is that all of the car manufacturers are starting to react to the government saying we're not selling these anymore. So they're thinking 5-10 years ahead. They're starting to retool their factories. They're also getting loans and incentives from the governments to build new factories for EVs and So the idea that no one's banning cars, like they are banning the internal combustion engine. Okay, so they're also rewriting this law right now, the NDP is, so by 2030 it will be a 90% reduction. This isn't its second reading. We're trying to update the act right now. They also call under Clean BC for a 25% reduction in all kilometers driven for all vehicles. So that includes EVs. And this gets into the idea that they're gonna design your need to travel out of your new home because you'll live in this 15-minute smart growth situation. And here's Honda saying that they're not going to sell internal combustion engines after 2040. They're done. Not in North America. They're no longer going to sell here. There's CBC telling us that new rules will effectively end sales of vehicles powered only by gasoline by 2035. Like that was just announced by the federal government. They told us 2 years ago, no one believed it. They said, well, I need my car to get to work. Doesn't make any sense. They did it anyways. So it's happening and the manufacturers are responding to it. And then here, this is in your Kootenay renewable energy plan. It's got this really nice little box that says, will I be forced to replace my car? And then it doesn't answer the question. But it gives you some context, right? It allows you to make up your own mind. It says, It's likely that electric vehicles will become so affordable and available that traditional gasoline cars will become obsolete long before 2050. In some cases, electric cars are already cheaper than gasoline cars when you account for the lifetime. The province of BC has set a requirement that all new cars will be zero-emission vehicles by 2040. That was the old bill, the new bill is 2035. In addition, self-driving cars may make personal vehicles much less useful and cost-effective for errands. So they're thinking about the future. And they say here to imagine a regional fleet of shared electric vehicles that you can call up with an app on your phone, and you want to go somewhere, and an electric vehicle, you just type something in, and an electric vehicle just shows up at your house, you get in it, you get out, you buy your groceries, and you go boop, and then a different car shows up and you get in that one. You don't own it, but it'll be there, and it'll be seamless. Just imagine how easy your life will be.
Yeah, right. Get another app.
So there's a word for that. It's called movement as a service or mobility as a service. Okay? You guys remember like 15 years ago you bought Microsoft Word, you installed it on your computer, it came on a disk, it was yours. But now you have software as a service, you have to pay every year. It's called Microsoft 365. And if you stop paying, it doesn't work. Okay, that's what movement as a service is. And of course, we have to get away from these inefficient personal automobiles because they create too much emissions. So they want the super hyper efficient, seamless situation where you don't own a vehicle. And it says here, this is from the Kelowna Regional Transportation Plan. Exact same words in Victoria, exact same words in Kamloops. Mobility as a service is the transition away from personally owned forms of transportation to mobility options that are purchased as a service. This is known as ride sharing. If you go to other cities, you see those stupid scooters they have that you swipe your credit card to get on. That's micro mobility as a service. Uber is mobility as a service. It's also known as stakeholder capitalism, where the government and a select corporations are the only stakeholders that actually own transportation. And in Creston they call it, and I think the same thing in Nelson, they don't use movement as a service, they call it digital on-demand transit, DODT. So in Kamloops, we call it a car-light community, that's our big move, and they have a goal of 50% less trips by personal vehicle by 2050. So that means 50% more people walking and taking transit, that's 50% less cars. They also have goals of restricting full-size vehicles from urban blocks, pedestrians only, restricting neighborhood roads to residents only. How would you do that? It would have to be some sort of electric thing to make it viable. Zero emission delivery zones, so the last 10 miles will be electric only. You won't be able to take your gas car into the city. In Kelowna, they're proposing vehicle kilometers traveled. Because you know there's road tax that goes from the gasoline, right? That's how we build all the roads. And if the people who drive the carbon consuming vehicles are paying for everything, the electric driving vehicle people that have their subsidized cars aren't paying any taxes for that. So instead of, because you don't pay a tax on fuel anymore, you just get electricity like everybody else, either the electricity will have to get taxed to make up for it, or they're going to charge you vehicle kilometers driven. Then they're going to have to track how many kilometers you drive. And this is already starting to happen. You see ICBCs giving discounts if you drive less than 10,000 per year. This is where it's going, guys. Okay, they're also coming up with something called congestion pricing. So if you go downtown at rush hour, they're going to charge you $20 or something. And of course, you'd have to have some sort of digital tracking and tag system for this to work. Because they're not going to pay people to stand there and write you tickets, right? So local examples here, this is from the RDCK thing. It says that the board supports the reduction of the use of private automobiles. I'm not sure if the board really supports that, but there it is. This is from the Nelson plan. It says establish a low emission zone, a defined area where access by certain types of fossil fuel vehicles are prohibited. That's in Nelson. And they also say they want to decrease vehicle kilometers driven. This is Metro Vancouver. So here they point out something. And they have all the same stuff I just mentioned. In Metro Vancouver, they point out something. They say that as electric vehicles become cheaper and easier and better than electric cars, it's going to cause a problem. Because everybody's going to go out and buy an electric car. And that's the problem.
That's the problem from an urban planning point of view. They don't want you driving a car because it's expensive for them. They have to build roads and infrastructure for you. They don't want that. So they say here that all personal vehicles, whether powered by electricity or fossil fuels, occupy scarce space. And they also cause traffic fatalities. So that's the next thing, is something called Vision Zero. You're going to see in all the cities, you'll see Vision Zero. And who can argue with getting away from injuries? They want zero injuries future. They're reducing speed limits, putting in little islands, removing lanes from roads to reduce the speed you travel, all in the name of safety, but it ties in with the other goals of reducing the kilometers you drive and making it, unaffordable to own a vehicle. And then they also tell us here, this is the ideological side, that only rich people will be able to afford EVs, so therefore it's exacerbating inequalities. And we know that the climate plans have to do everything through the lens of equality. So if you follow that through logically, personal automobile ownership is not compatible with what they're pushing. And here it says in Kamloops, their goal is to reduce vehicle ownership. Victoria, reduce vehicle ownership. Metro Vancouver, reduce kilometers driven. It's not just here, it's everywhere. So assuming that we did want to switch all the cars over to electricity, we'll have a look, see what we can do. This is all the energy uses. This is not electricity, this is all petroleum, electricity, this is all the energy used for BC. This is electricity. 25% of the energy we use in BC. This is natural gas, and about a third of that is for homes. So this part is for heating homes, all of this is for industrial. This is your gas and diesel for transportation and other things, and this is your biofuel, where we burn trees because it's good for the environment. And here's the context. It's actually smaller than that, but that's Site C. That'll come online next year, God willing. So if we look at British Columbia, in 2021 we produced 64 terawatt hours of electricity for the whole year. That's 150 years of hydroelectric and utility development in this province. So let's give some more context here. 41 terawatt hours, that's how much energy is in all the gasoline we sold in BC in 2021. That's the energy equivalent. Another 22.5 terawatt hours, that's diesel on top of that. And then you add on all the natural gas energy equivalent for heating homes, and you come up with an 87 terawatt hour shortfall. Okay? Now, people who've looked into this issue will say, yeah, Geoff, but electric cars are more efficient. That's true. A gasoline car is about somewhere between 15-20% efficient. The new EVs are getting closer to 80% efficient. So say even if you cut that by 60-70%, you still need a huge amount of electricity, which we just don't have. If you read, we just hit the record this past weekend with the cold weather. And there's Site C, okay? Just for context. So you guys think it's possible to electrify BC?
No.
Well, I say this to everybody, I said, don't be so negative, guys. I'll show you how we're going to do it, okay? Now, I'm going to show you how we're going to do it. You're going to start to understand why these plans say what they say. So one thing we can do is we can increase the power output. Okay, that's one way. But there's obviously limits on that. And right now, BC Hydro has put out a call for power. They want 4,000 more gigawatt hours by 2030. Yeah, we can increase the efficiency of the equipment we have. So swap out all your baseboard heating for a heat pump and all your inefficient incandescent bulbs for LEDs, that sort of thing. So we're reducing our demand. But if we're talking about putting all these cars onto the grid, we can see that the energy just isn't there. So what we could do is decrease the number of cars we're going to put on the grid. Okay? I think necessarily we're going to have to do that. But on top of that, we're also going to have to decrease the kilometers that those cars drive. So somebody who regularly drives 40,000 kilometers a year will have to turn into a 10,000 kilometer per year driver to make this work with an electric vehicle. We can start to do other things like timed usage. So you know the demand goes in peaks and troughs. So they'll take the demand from the peak and say you can't charge your car, you can't use your blender at home, you can't watch TV or whatever it is, but you can do that at nighttime when the demand is less. Okay, that's timed usage. And then we can come up with other things called smart grid and smart appliances and smart thermostats, where the utility can directly control the appliances in your home. It sounds crazy, but this is a real thing, and it's in the BC Hydro documentation. All those yellow arrows there, those are called, we saw it on that other slide, it's called DSM, Demand Side Management. They're managing the demand. This is from BC Hydro's submission, their signpost update to the Utilities Commission BC. They've got two scenarios. One is called their reference load forecast. This is their best guess where we are right now, okay? And it shows here, 2026 is when Site C comes online. By 2029, you'll be short 1,000 gigawatt hours and short 3,200 by 2033. That's why they put out a call for power for 4,000 gigawatt hours, okay? But there's another scenario here. So this is their best guess based on the policies of the government 8 months ago or a year ago. This is their best guess called the Accelerated Electrification Plan. You know, like if the government suddenly said, we're gonna make all cars electric, we're gonna force you to retrofit your house and put in heat pumps and do 2% of existing homes over to heat pumps over the next 20 years. That's the Accelerated Electrification Plan. They are 3 Site C dams worth short by 2030. There's not 3 more Site C dams coming. Okay? But there's a way to do this. BC Hydro's not dumb. They got smart people over there. This is their integrated resource plan. They put it out in 2021. They realized it was way off. They had to redo it in 2023 because the demand was way higher than what they thought. So they readjusted it. And here they tell us that we have an energy and capacity surplus. BC Hydro is well positioned to serve our customers' province-wide electricity needs for most of the next decade. That's not the end of the sentence. There's some qualifying words at the end. Okay, the qualifying words. With additional demand side measures. Okay? Demand side measures. Word of the day. Demand response technology. This is from BC Hydro. The ability to manage demand such as electric vehicle charging or home appliances, water heaters by shifting electricity demand out of peak hours. They will have to do that remotely, which means you have to give up sovereignty of the thermostat in your house. They go on to say that their assessment is that pursuing more demand-side measures could increase bills, end up with time-varying rates. So you want to heat your house during the day? Well, too bad, the demand's too high. You got to pay twice the price. You can only heat it at night. Well, unless you want to pay, right? And then basically it's going to increase the risk to all of us and end up with more expensive options. But they've left out one demand-side measure. What do you think is the most effective demand-side measure? It's the cost. Sorry? I didn't catch that.
I'm gonna guess charging your electric car.
No, the most effective demand-side measure is the price.
Yeah.
If it costs too much money, I'm not going to use it.
Yeah.
So all of this green stuff, all of it is based on the argument. People say, oh, the price of electricity is going to go up. And then the argument comes back, no, don't worry. BC Hydro is owned by the government and it's government regulated. They would never increase the prices on it.
They've already done it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's coming because they're going to paint themselves into a corner with all this electrification. They're going to hit the rev limiter and then they're going to jack up the prices, right? And then all those things that were economical, like your heat pump and everything else, will suddenly not be so economical.
Right.
Okay?
And you want to own an electric car.
Yeah. So now we need to talk about consumption. How am I doing for time?
You're an hour and 4 minutes, so keep going.
Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, consumption. So this is a big thing you see right now in all these plans, the zero waste economy, zero waste by 2040. That's what Nelson talks about. We can reduce, reuse, recycle. We can compact the garbage and make more room, but eventually we're gonna run out of space. So what's left at the end is to consume less and just stop creating garbage. If we can't recycle it, you just gotta stop consuming. So logically, something called consumption interventions are on their way. Okay? If you think about it, like those are your options. You guys heard of the C40 cities? This was kind of viral on social media. I won't go into it, but it talks about they've got a target of 0 meat per person, 0 automobiles per person, and 3 shirts per year by 2030. This was all viral all over social media. This is a link in the report. You guys can read this yourself. But this comes from the C40 cities. The C40 cities represents all of the biggest cities in the world, 1.6 billion people, and 36% of the world's GDP. They often partner with the UN Environmental Program and ICLEI and all these other bodies. To say that this is wacky stuff that should be ignored, I don't think so. This is a very influential group with a lot of money behind them. And they talk about consumption. Now, this graph here, see these colored things? Remember we showed that pie chart of the climate action? It was waste, housing, and transportation. This is waste, housing, and transportation right here, okay? But they realized that there's more coming. This is Canada here. It's Canada, Norway, USA. 50% of our emissions come from other things like food, flying airplanes, consumer goods, and consumer discretionary services. That accounts for 50% of emissions. The climate plans don't deal with something called consumption. They only deal with transport, waste, and housing, okay? What do you think the chances are if they're spending billions of dollars on this, that they're just gonna forget about that other 50% of emissions? Okay, when you get your avocados in the store that came from Mexico, that's loaded with emissions, right? Floating.
So many emissions is floating out.
It floated all the way up here, you're right. So is there any evidence that we're starting to do this here in BC? I was in Victoria in Saanich, and they do something called a consumption-based greenhouse gas inventory. It's not the CEEI, which some of our more knowledgeable people may be aware of. A consumption-based inventory tracks your food, textiles, clothing, travel, all that other stuff that I just showed you. So here it is for Saanich, and they say that a consumption-based greenhouse gas inventory, using that, our emissions nearly double. Well, that's weird. That's what that other chart showed us. Okay? Same thing for Victoria. And in their climate action plan, they have a chart here. These two pie charts are showing fish, meat, eggs, dairy products, grains, paper, plastics, textiles. Okay? They're now targeting consumption for CO2 reduction. This is happening. Okay?
It's the
Is
best
there any-
comedy show I've been to in a long time.
What's that?
It's the best comedy show I've been to in a long time.
I promise you, none of this is a joke. This is all real, and it's happening. So, is there any evidence this is happening in Kootenays?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes, there is. So, in that thing that I said was a climate action plan, it's the Kootenays Renewable Energy Plan. Big move number 5. It's called supporting actions. They say they're going to set the stage for future work on community, place-based, and consumption-based energy and emissions. They're setting the stage. They're preparing for it. Okay? And then here Nelson did one, but they did a really bad job at it. They just looked at certain things. And they did something else, which is not really a consumption-based one, but here they started to include 13% of emissions are coming from food. Okay, so now Nelson is starting to target it. But if they do it like everyone else, you'll see everything you consume creating CO2, and that's when you get into the idea of a digital carbon wallet and tracking and having an allowance. That's where all that's coming from. And to track how much carbon you use, you're going to have to track everything you use. So it's just tracking what you use. That's what it is. It's got really nothing to do, well, if you believe them. And then here, this was just in the news the other day. CTV says roughly 10% of global emissions come from tourism. You see, all these climate action plans, scooters, bicycles, walking, electric buses, electric cars. This is all okay. But they're telling you diesel's bad, motorcycles are bad, cars are bad, and airplanes are bad. And now CTV's trying to tell us that traveling is bad for the environment.
What about private jets?
Exactly. Right.
Send a postcard to Davos. Yeah. By private jet. Yeah. Okay. And then, same thing federally, they're talking about a plastic registry right now. Again, climate action requires data. they have to track everything you do to do climate action. Now they want to track plastics at a federal level. Talking about Clean BC, this is, just to show you guys, this is our carbon tax, $30 per ton. Goes up to 2018, that's when the NDP got in here and they raised it to 35. They've got a target of 170, so it's gonna go up 2 more times from where we are now. So right now I pay about $180 a year on my gas bill. That'll go up to $600 a year in tax on my gas bill. Okay? So when you hear like guys like Kevin Falcon, they're saying, well, we had it capped at $30. Actually, you can look back under the Liberals. Christy Clark was there saying, we'll raise it. We're just waiting for other provinces to raise it. And they're the ones who put the legislation in to begin with. So I don't know who you could vote for provincially that would get rid of that. I think the only people talking about right now are the Conservatives, or maybe you've got an independent. But I think publicly saying that you've just got Conservatives. Mm-hmm. And then this is from the Business Council of BC. They've got a great economist working there, and he went through the Clean BC numbers. He actually cracked open their spreadsheet to see what this is going to cost the economy. And I know you guys can't see that, so I'll just read it out to you. In the bottom right, it says that by 2033 or whatever, the provincial economy in British Columbia will be negative $28 billion of GDP. That's what Clean BC will cost in Clean BC's own numbers that they use to sell the program from the NDP. And those are probably goosed, right? Their own numbers say it's going to be minus 30 bill. This is what it looks like on a chart. Like GDP per capita, you're going from $53,000 per person down to $47,000 per head in British Columbia. It's going to be a huge hit to the economy if we go through with this. Do I have time to do smart cities? Yeah, you want to keep going? Should I keep going?
Yes, go.
Okay, this is the good conspiracy stuff you guys all came for, right?
That's right.
So when we talk about smart cities, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because this is also sustainable development. We talk about smart meters, smart thermostats, 5G, LED light fixtures, cameras, radar, artificial intelligence. It's all kind of loosely in there to achieve these sustainable development goals. And what I want to do is play a video really quickly. What is a smart city? Leverage technology to serve people. Smart cities are built around users. They start with an information network. That's the sustainable development thing. It says sustainable in the middle, okay? Making cities more alive. Connected streets are the core of smart cities. Each street light can gather and send information.
Right on.
This video goes on for a bit. I'll just, I know I'm running a little long here, so I'll just sit through it. So they list off a bunch of benefits. Garbage cans tell you when they're full. As you're walking, street lights turn on automatically. If there's an accident, it automatically alerts someone. They can check water levels and things. Like, this is not really revolutionary things that are going to change your life. But to do all this, oh, and you can find a parking spot for your EV. This was 2016 when this video came out. And they tell you need tracking on every street light and data collection to achieve those things. But we can achieve those things right now with the technology we have without collecting it all and sending it to a central control area. So this is what McKinsey Global Institute on smart cities, or what they say on smart cities. They say that 70% of the sustainable development goals can be met by smart cities. So you see why there's the push for the smart city? Remember climate action, guys? Why is there a big eyeball on climate action? Because we need data. We need to collect data for the KPIs so we can track everything and show that we're meeting the goals, because it's a project management system. So here it says predictive policing, crowd management, healthcare, digital public transit payment, home energy automation systems, home energy consumption tracking, dynamic electricity pricing, that's DSM. This is all part of a smart city. Digital tracking and payment for your waste, water consumption tracking. I think you guys are going through that right now. They want to put water meters in, from what I hear. So how are they going to do all that? Well, they need to have a wireless network to do that. So that's where we get into the 5G. So I'm not here to tell you that 5G is bad for you. There's a pretty good case to make for being inundated with EMF, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about the smart city side. So you've got those big ugly towers, but how many of you guys know about the little micro towers that go in?
Oh,
They're all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
So you guys are lucky out here because TELUS hasn't looked at it yet, but this is Crespin. I think they have 2 towers downtown. It looks like Nelson. I imagine these are the micro 5G towers that are starting to go in Nelson. This is Kamloops. This is one neighborhood in Juniper. This is Valley View. This is Metro Vancouver.
Oh my God.
They put them every 100 meters. They're building a grid.
Yeah.
And the reason they're building a grid is because in the future everything's going to be wireless. We've now hit the place where it's cheaper to do everything wirelessly and faster than it is to run a fiber optic cable. This has always been a huge battle, getting good internet out to the rural areas. The government's been pushing that because they needed the data. They wanted you guys on for the economic development and get the data. Now TELUS is just going to put 5G out there. That's what's going to happen. And that'll support your self-driving vehicles. And just to prove the point, that there will be a push to cut the cord. This is already happening in the United States.
Hi. Look what you've done. Thanks. Look, I finally cut the cable, switched to Verizon Home Internet.
Cable internet wasn't cutting mustard, right?
No, this rules. I just plugged it in. Boom.
And there's no surprise price tags or hidden fees.
Cut my bill down to just $25 a month.
Exactly.
Cuts are just go with the amazing speed and reliability of Verizon.
Hey! Oh! Get off my side!
Cut the cable and cut your internet bill to just $25 a month.
That's 5G. That's a 5G enabled modem. They want you to put it in your house, and they're willing to subsidize it and give you a great deal every month so everybody gets on it. Yeah. Right? And then that box, you now get 100 times faster internet supposedly, although when I used 5G in the States, it was pretty much the same as 4G. It wasn't any much faster. But they want to cut the cord because the new infrastructure of the future is not DSL, it's not cable internet from Shaw, it's all going to be 5G. So that'll be your TV, internet, phone, everything coming in one box in your house. Because it is the cheapest thing to do. They don't have to maintain any infrastructure. If you were that company, that's where you would be investing your money, and that is what they did. So, all this stuff they're talking about putting in cities, I said we talk about LED lights. Nothing wrong with LED lights, I'm afraid. I think they're just fine. You see there's blue ones in some of the cities. They were in Kelowna, and Vernon has them. I've seen them in the States. I've spoken to the city, and I said, what's the deal? They said there was something wrong with the manufacture of these lights, and they ended up with these blue lights. So they just go and take them down. They don't know until they put them up, and they see them, and then we complain and they take them down. This is just industrial, like SCADA Wi-Fi, because there's traffic controllers at every intersection. That's how they communicate. But we don't know what this is. I took that picture in Saanich near Victoria, and I'll show you why you should be concerned about that. If you look at an LED or any street light, you're going to see a little knob on there. That little knob, don't worry about that. The little one. That's just a dimming switch. When it gets dark, the switch closes, the light turns on. When it gets light, the switch opens, the light turns off. That's been there for 40 years. Even on the old sodium pressure lights, you'll see the same thing. Okay? What you need to pay attention to is when they start putting other devices in that place. So one of them would be radar. They have millimeter wave radar. I can buy this. It's like battleship tracking radar. I can buy this for $20 on Amazon. Put it in my house. The technology is evolving rapidly. Here's some other ones you can get. Speed monitoring, air quality, noise monitoring, safety, so 360-degree camera. And here's this guy. He's from a company called Liveable Cities, and he's going to tell us about it.
Why is SmartLinks the best tool for your urban data collection? Our SmartLink solution is extremely compact and rugged, allowing for ease of handling and transportation of hundreds of units on a single truck. These sensors were designed with reliability in mind and are suitable for the harshest environments. Our suite of city sensors can be easily and safely deployed in minutes with no tools needed. They plug directly into the streetlights you already have. The location, high on top of the streetlight, helps to prevent theft and vandalism of your sensor infrastructure. And that location gives a bird's eye perspective of the local area, making it ideal for reporting many types of sensor data. From start to finish, installation per pole is less than 2 minutes. Our solution is designed with your privacy in mind. We work with the city to ensure
Right.
I always stop that video at the same spot. So if you go on their website, you'll see that they are a huge proponent of the Sustainable Development Goals. They claim their solution is for sustainable development. That's how they market it as. City planners, purse strings, social procurement, they got to look at it through that lens. They're going to be buying this stuff because it's going to help them achieve their sustainable development goals. Okay? And obviously you see it all goes into one central database, but they say we have your privacy in mind. The good news is, guys, this hasn't really been rolled out big time in BC. It's not in Kamloops, it's not in Kelowna from what I've seen. I haven't seen it out here in the Kootenays. I did see it in Saanich. I did see it in Victoria. Okay, so how to find out about this? You got to talk to the city guys, whether it's operations or the traffic guy, depending on your municipality, how that works. You got to find out what they're putting in there. And I know for a fact that one of these devices was, on someone's desk in Kamloops. They're showing them to them at trade shows, is what I was told. They don't have any plans to put them in right now, but the next sustainability climate plan will probably demand we do this for traffic efficiency or something like that, and then we'll go ahead and put it in. So it's happening, it just hasn't happened yet, but you're lucky because now you have a chance to get ahead of it, right? So now, how many people here take the bus? Yeah?
Sometimes,
Okay,
yeah.
there's a transit system around here in the Kootenays. I know not a lot of people use it. You're mostly rural, you rely on vehicles. But there is a transit system, and I found this out by going through Kamloops city documents. They talked about this thing called UMO. And remember I was telling you about movement as a service. Well, part of movement as a service, in Kelowna anyways, they talked about creating a regional database where you can move seamlessly from Peachland into West Kelowna, into Lake Country, all under one big database, pay with one card, like a digital ID card paying thing. And you can go from micro-mobility scooter into an Uber onto a bus with the same card. It's like a digital ID. So they need to make all the data the same, make it all interoperable. And it turns out that they just announced that they have that. It's called UMO. This is BC Transit. BC Transit in Vancouver is called TransLink. It's a separate corporation. They've had something similar there since 2016, but I'm not sure if it has this functionality. They call it Compass Card. Compass Card and UMO have a database that tracks everything, and it's managed by a company called Cubic. So I looked into Cubic. Cubic has two main businesses. Number one, I'll tell you in a second. Number two is transportation, but what do you think number one is? They're like the number one military contractor for the U.S. Army.
Oh.
So that's who's building our transport. Just when you thought there was no guardrails or anything in place, then that's who they chose to do it. It's kind of weird.
Look at the world at a box.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly, right? So there's all their contracts with the U.S. Army. They've been a military contractor for 70 years. So I'm pretty sure you guys have UMO on transit out here in the Kootenays right now. So if you look at these transportation plans, you look at the C40, they say the future is with no cars. There's going to be a seamless digital on-demand transport or movement as a service where you have one way of paying, a digital card or a digital ID, and you can move seamlessly from private transport to public transport, and no one will own a car. That's in line with everything they're telling us, and that's what they're doing. And here's from Metro Vancouver Transport, they're telling us that it will do dynamic system management. So it will stop vehicles from going certain places and redirect them in other places. Okay, so it's going to be controlling transport. And then obviously the risk here is that we all own our own vehicles now. If you want to travel, you can. But in the future, if everything goes up to one database, which is managed by the government, it gives them that moral hazard where someone can just flip the switch and turn it off. Like for instance, in an emergency or during COVID. It also makes the system vulnerable. What happens if it gets hacked? no one goes to work that day? Is that really our future? Is that what we're looking at? Yeah. So here, this is the Metro Vancouver. They were very explicit. They say that they want to establish a comprehensive and secure database for urban mobility. Okay, but they tell us that storing the information will be available to everyone, but the information will be de-identified. So they'll take your identification stuff out. Okay, so it'll just be the metrics there for everybody to look at and make decisions. But then they go on to say that, and there'll also be a separate database, which includes all your personal information. But don't worry, that's only going to be available to special people in the government. And they promise they're not going to do anything. Okay? So to make this happen, there was something called a privacy impact assessment done. Okay? And all that is just something there that's under the FOI PPA Act. It's a legislative requirement. Whenever you're dealing with someone's data as a government institution, you have to do a PIA. And you have to say, this is in place, there's all this data encryption, it can't get hacked, there's passwords, it's all really great. But they never consider the government as the bad actor, right? And now that you're giving everything to the government, they have all that moral hazard. There's nothing there, there's no guardrails in place. So that's what's coming. So how could this be abused? What's the context? Why should you care? Obviously someone could just flip the switch. They can set geographic boundaries for your vehicle. If you don't own the vehicle, they could just turn your particular card off, but maybe if you have the wrong political opinions.
Sure.
Right? So this is what's coming, and it's going to be enabled by the smart city infrastructure in this digital thing that UMO's come up with.
Or if you don't take the required amount of booster shots.
Whatever, they can do it for whatever they want. So even CSIS warns us about smart cities. I won't read it all out, but they basically say councils need to be very careful with smart cities and there's a lot of risks. So the big question is, why are the councils and our district representatives doing this? Well, most of them will have something called their strategic goals. And if you read those goals, they will be usually fairly in line with the OCP and the plans of the city. Like for instance, this one is from Maple Ridge: livable community, climate leadership, engaged, healthy, diversified. So that's your diversity and inclusion. But it's basically all the same. Kelowna, Kamloops, Maple Ridge here, they're all generally the same. Also, the strategic plan and the OCPs were written to be in line with the provincial legislation of banning vehicles, going electric, which is in line with the Pan-Canadian framework, which is in line with our treaty obligations under the Paris Accord. That's why this is happening. Why is the council going along with it? Because of funding. I had someone just tell me today, the reason they're looking at it is because of funding. Okay? The government, like the federal government's not supposed to be involved in our business, but they can give us money. And then the FCM, which is billed as this group to represent the small municipalities to the big bad government and speak truth to power. Really, if you go on the FCM website, I challenge you to find any grant anywhere that has nothing to do with diversity, equity, or environment. That's all the money's linked to. All the grants, all the programs are linked to the Green Municipal Fund. It's all part of the same agenda. They're not there building infrastructure and roads and utilities. It's just green stuff and disaster management. Might be wrong on that, but that's sure what it looks like.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing it. You get good media coverage. So I'm not here to tell you that there's a conspiracy to take your rights away. Okay? What I'm here telling you is that there is a well-defined plan that's only focused on development, and it's not considering your rights. And going through with it, logically, you will lose a lot of your rights. It's not compatible with the free market, it's not compatible with our Western democracy, and it's because there's no safeguards and there's no context in these plans. It's lacking, okay?
Also sounds like it's gonna bankrupt the government, like, with the government's at pretty high debt.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
So,
That's really bankrupt, but.
should I call it there? Okay. Yeah. Okay, you call me in 5 more minutes. I've been talking a long time. Okay, so change. So all this is coming from the federal government and the stuff we've done internationally, federal, provincial, municipal stuff happens at the pleasure of the province. That's what the legislation says. Okay, we're beholden to them. So imagine we get a Pierre Poilievre or somebody in federally and he's going to axe the carbon tax and all this. Okay, our carbon tax in BC is provincial. So he's going to say, well, I can't do nothing about that. That's provincial. And he said, well, come help us here in Creston or Nelson. He's like, well, that's not my jurisdiction. I'm federal. That's provincial. So then you got to look provincially. Say you get a John Rustad or a Conservative in, and they're going to get rid of all this stuff. Like that's what their platform is saying. And you say, come save me here in the RDCK. And he's going to say, okay. So first thing he's going to do is probably talk to his ministers, to talk to your councillors and district representatives. And they're like, woohoo, sustainable development. We want more grants for sustainable development. So then what's John Rustad going to do?
Right.
Come in like a tyrant and completely he's never going to do that.
That's right.
So if you guys don't like this, right, we see the change is coming from above. We've got to get to a place where the change is coming from below. Okay?
Yeah.
Like both things have to happen at the same time. You need to change federally and provincially, but you need to change locally. Because even if it does change up there, there's so much momentum. This is all happening in a vacuum that it'll just keep happening no matter who you have in upper forms of government. So solutions, what we did in Kamloops is we organized. We created an association. So like everybody came here once tonight, we brought everybody together. Not everybody's available every day. But say right now tonight, you guys all joined an association that was focused on one idea and you wanted to represent that. Everybody's here. And then the next meeting, you have different people come and different people come. The association will grow and grow and grow. So one person can go and speak to the council in the district on behalf of potentially 1,000 people, instead of just the same 2 or 3 people at the council or with their signs or whatever. Now you're a professional organization, right? That's what we did in Kamloops, and we're trying to build relationships with government. Okay, we don't want to be looking from the outside, we want to be on the inside. Okay, we want to build relationships with the media and then also with the community. People that don't agree with us in the community. I'm talking to them every day. Had some great conversations, found out we agree on a lot of things, building bridges. That's what needs to happen.
Nice. Good.
What you can do is, once you do have some clout, is try and target the OCP. So, like I said at the beginning, teaspoon of sugar, let's take out the drop assignment. Okay? Because those plans are only focused on development and sustainability. There's nothing in there about property rights. Let's put that into the OCP. We can do whatever we want for the environment, assuring that it's not going to make it economically unaffordable for our residents, restrict their movement, or put something in there like that that also has to be considered, that extra lens that they need. And you can also start to vote people in that are sympathetic to your ideas, so that requires involvement in the system. We can't just sit back and complain anymore. We have to be involved. And we have to educate your MLA, and then if that doesn't work, maybe vote for a new MLA, because you need that change on the provincial level as well. So this is what we did in Kamloops. We created the Kamloops Citizen Safety Committee. So it's just an association, and we have a committee that chooses the policy, and we're common sense climate policy, local government, open, transparent use of technology, and there's 2 other things I can't remember right now as I zip through. And lastly, I want to say this. So we're all freedom fighters here. I consider myself a freedom fighter based on all the hands at the start. And I want to say that the freedom movement itself, from where I'm standing, okay, my experience, it sucks at communicating. It really, really sucks. Okay, it's a giant tent, a huge tent of ideas that all come together. People from all walks of life come together. We're all brought together for one reason, or maybe different reasons, and we all have different ideas. And we're all like libertarian, and we're against the man, or whatever it is that brought us there. We're high conflict people, we're stubborn, and we all hold on to our ideas, and we all let everybody talk about every idea. And every freedom meeting I've been to everywhere is all kind of the same. All these alternative ideas are all lumped into one big thing. No one's focused on one specific idea. And when you talk to somebody who's not in the freedom movement, they say, oh, those guys, the wizards and crystals and Bigfoot and alien and shots and flat earth, chemtrails, they'll list off 100 things, right? Because what do they see when they see us people who are concerned about freedom out there waving our flags and in the councils talking to people? What are we talking about? What are we talking about? Right? We're talking about wizards and crystals and aliens and big, like, it's just, what I'm trying to say, guys, is maybe those ideas, there's merit in those ideas, but if you want change, we have to focus. If everybody focused on one idea and one change, you'd be a whole lot more effective. That Kootenay Climate Group, they are focused on climate policy. They're not in there talking about Bigfoot, okay? Like, that's what we need to do as a movement. It's time to, I'm gonna say grow up a little bit, okay?
Yeah.
Last idea, I promise. Okay? So whenever you start something new, like say when the trucker rally happened, right? We had uninformed optimism. We're like, yeah, we're gonna do this. We're gonna change Canada for the better, right? Then nothing really happened and the protests got crushed. And we were kind of in the doldrums there for a few months. We got to this informed pessimism. We're like, oh, we're never gonna win. And here we are 3 years later, we're in the valley of despair, right? But we need to get to this informed optimism. We can't give up. And every single task we take on as freedom fighters, so say a new bill comes out, C-44, everybody gets excited, they go, yeah, and they get involved, and then they do the thing, and then they get to the uninformed, and then they get into the valley of despair. Then they move on to the next thing, because there's a new news cycle. Now it's SOGI. Yeah, let's all go do SOGI, da-da-da, everybody's out there, da-da-da, and it kind of goes like this. And every little thing in the freedom movement has this, but no one's being consistent on one. There are people, I'm just generalizing, there are. But what I'm trying to say is we need to stay the course all the way, and we shouldn't expect the world to change overnight. We need to pick things that actually work and just stick through it until the end. And I'm so sorry for talking so long.
Oh, you're awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Woo! Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you created this.